Week 11 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers. I looked it off the wire this week. The first kicker, John Parker Romo with the Minnesota Vikings. So Renchard, we know he's on injury reserve. He's out at least 3 more weeks. The Minnesota Viking team. And Parker Romo, he came in and he never kicked an NFL game. And he had 12 fantasy points. So the opportunity's been there all season long for Renchard. This Minnesota Viking team plays indoors, which is always a plus, even though Week 11, another road game at the Tennessee Titans. But the opportunities have been there, and this is an offense, believe it or not, that stalled out a lot in the red zone this season. So Parker Romo, 4 for 4 with his field goals, out there in 98% of fantasy leagues. And this Minnesota Viking team is amongst the league leaders in field goal attempts this season. Next kicker, Jake Bates of the Detroit Lions. So Jake Bates, obviously on a high-powered offense, Detroit Lion team, out there in 61% of fantasy league. 2 big kicks he hit in the Week 10 comeback victory with Goff throwing 5 interceptions. Bates a 58-yarder to tie that game up, and then a 52-yarder squeezing it right in the left upright to win the ball game. So when you're on a high-powered offense, the opportunities are going to be there. And this Lion team, we know they're one of the best teams in the league, 8-1 on the season. So the last few games for Bates, Week 8 versus Tennessee, 12. Week 9 at Green Bay, 6. And Week 10 at Houston, 12 fantasy points. So the last 3 out of 5 games, double-digit fantasy points. Always a plus that you play indoors as well, where you don't have to deal with the outside factors. And this next game's a great matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Indoor ball game with obviously Detroit going back home, where he don't have to worry about the element. Just boost up kickers value weekly, like I said, if you're playing indoors instead of outdoors. So with a high-powered offense he's on, and indoors majority of his games this season, Jake Bates playing at home in Detroit. He's definitely a kicker I would go out there and add this week. It's kicker Austin Seibert of the Washington Commanders. Seibert, he was dropped in a bunch of fantasy leagues, and right now he's available in tons of fantasy leagues. Here is Austin Seibert. After getting dropped where he was ruled out with the hip injury, a lot of people aren't going to hold on to 2 kickers, and he's out there, Seibert, in 68% of fantasy leagues. So we know this season Seibert's been a great kicker, no doubt about it, for this Commander team, where he's had double-digit fantasy games in every game besides 2 of the season. So he's got a long-distance boot. We know this Commander team, they've stalled out at times as well in the red zone, or have to settle for 45, 50-yard field goals. And I think Seibert has an opportunity to come back in Week 11. The only downside is, obviously, it's a Thursday night game and a quick turnaround where they ruled him out on Saturday with Seibert. So maybe he was close to playing, and they figured maybe we'll sit him out one game and he'll be back Thursday and almost 100%. So Austin Seibert, like I said, he's been one of the best kickers all season in fantasy football, and people dropped him if he missed Week 10's ball game versus Steelers, and he's out there in 68% of fantasy leagues. Next kicker, Blake Grupp of the New Orleans Saints. Blake Grupp's been a decent kicker this season for this New Orleans Saints team. In the last couple weeks, he's been very solid. Week 8 at the Chargers, 8. Week 9 at Carolina, 11. And Week 10 versus the Falcons, 7 fantasy points. Another home game in Week 11 versus the Browns, where their defense can't stop anyone. They give up the 18th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And I always say this, if you're playing indoors, it's always a plus and gives a kicker more advantage than a kicker playing on the road. So Blake Grupp, like I said, he's been good all season long, especially at home. And this New Orleans Saints team, they're an offense without a lot of good receiving options, where at times they're going to have to settle for some field goals. So Grupp, well, he's out there in tons of fantasy leagues at 87%. Definitely a kicker I looked at off the wire this week. The next kicker, Joshua Carty of the Los Angeles Rams. So Joshua Carty, I liked him coming into the week. Obviously, the game wasn't played yet, and it be played here tonight on Monday Night Football versus the Miami Dolphins. So Carty on the season, he's had a decent boot for the most part. He's in a high-powered offense with this Los Angeles Ram team, and it wouldn't be surprising to me tonight if he goes out there, has a good ball game. Dolphins give up the second most fantasy points to kickers on the season, and 11 a good matchup at the New England Patriots, where they're bend but don't break defense at times, where they give up the 17th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So anytime your home games are indoors, and anytime you play on an offense, obviously, like this Los Angeles Ram team, where you got guys like Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, and Stafford at quarterback, there's going to be opportunities to put points on the board. So Carty, like I said, I like them coming into the week. Still out there, 96% of fantasy leagues, and definitely a kicker I looked at this week. And the final kicker I looked at is Joey Sly of the New England Patriots. So Joey Sly, he's always had a good boot. I know he's bounced around the league a little bit over the last few seasons. Obviously, is Joey Sly. The last couple of years was with the Washington Commanders, and before that was with the Carolina Panthers. And this season, He's with the Patriots. So the last few games for Sly, Week 8 versus the Jets 4, Week 9 at Tennessee 7, and Week 10 at the Bears 12. So he's on an offense that obviously stalls out a lot in the red zone, even though they're definitely improving over the last couple weeks with Drake May on the center. And we know Sly's got a big boot where 50-plus yards hasn't been a problem for him throughout his NFL career. So with a good matchup coming up in Week 11 versus the Rams, and then a good one in Week 12, I think in deeper leagues, Joey Sly can help fantasy owners. We're 4 teams on bye. Once again, he's out there 99% of fantasy leagues. So that's a few kickers I looked at off the wire for Week 11 of the fantasy football season.